The Elder Scrolls series just turned 30, in case you hadn't heard, and The Elder Scrolls Online, a bit of an underappreciated gem in the MMO space, just turned 10 years old. This is Khan from Ninja Pulls, and I was lucky enough to get invited by Bethesda to the big birthday event in Amsterdam. It was an amazing party, I had a great time, but while I was there, I was also trying to think what the players can take away from an event like this. Behind all the promos and excitement, the more important and interesting stuff under the surface. I came up with 3 that I wanted to share, nothing revolutionary, just food for thought, especially for fans who weren't able to attend. Number 1, this game really does look like it's in good shape. 10 years and $2 billion are major milestones for any live service game, especially one which did not have the best launch. The monthly fee alliance system, being forced to do zones and quests in a specific order, typical for MMOs of the time maybe, but very un-Elder Scrolls. ZeniMax Online Studios spent a lot of time discussing these early complaints and the challenges of creating this beast of a game only to spend years overhauling it. Back in January, creative director Rich Lambert even made the case that much of the last 10 years was spent iterating and remolding ESO into the best version of itself, removing level gates, adding level scaling, total freedom of movement, overhauling the champion system twice, adding 3 new classes, hybridizing combat, housing, battlegrounds, companions, mythics. The game has been transformed multiple times. So now, the argument goes, they can really focus on polish and hopefully performance. ESO's reinvention is no secret, but it was refreshing to see the studio being so frank about it, on and off stage. And it's a reminder that ESO has rarely had the luxury of surfing on hype, which is one of the main ways big studios and the gaming press get into our wallets these days. We'll never know how much of those $2 billion came from the Crown Store, but even skeptics will admit there's no way you hit such a massive number without a stable and loyal player base. Again, not exactly big news, but it's reassuring to look back on the history and see those metrics. Another more nerdy thing that I hadn't really grokked is just how stacked the senior content team is at this studio. There are visible examples like Mike Finnegan, who seems to have worked on practically every successful MMO out there except World of Warcraft. But ZOS is not a super flashy studio, and it kinda takes an event like this to remind you what the team is packing. The tabletop to Tamriel panel was fucking badass. They casually wheeled out a bunch of guys who were all there designing and setting the standard for multiplayer systems in the 80s and even earlier. They were there when programmers were first figuring out how to turn pen and paper RPGs into pixels, and helped invent many of the worlds and systems that we take for granted. Now, I'm not super knowledgeable about pen and paper RPGs, but I was sitting next to Eggbirds, Ninja Pul's resident D&D maestro, and he was just gasping with delight as these guys' resumes appeared on screen, and the various legendary rulebooks and campaigns they created. Their collective credits are insane, and except for Lawrence Schick, they are all still working on ESO's development, writing, and zone design. The MMO format is a bit of a storytelling straitjacket, which is why so many MMO stories are bad, but narrative and setting have been one of ESO's big strengths right from the start. Go back to reviews from the launch of the game and they all draw attention to this. And we largely have these guys to thank. It's just one area of the game, but it is foundational and the main attraction for a lot of people. That's barely scratching the surface, but for players like me who spent a lot of time talking about bugs and performance or balance issues in PvE and PvP, it's nice to be reminded that that's not the whole story. The strong narrative of improvement, quality storytelling, and financial success all make it easier to be optimistic about where ESO is headed. Number 2, scribing is huge. I'll admit I never really wanted spellcrafting in ESO. Every time someone brought it up, I think, are you crazy? This will straight up break the game. At the event, ZOS made it very clear they've been worried about the same thing. The system from Oblivion was never going to work in an MMO, and I got to ask Kira Ross-Schlitt and Brian Wheeler point blank why they took 9 years and didn't just abandon the idea. The basic answer is that the idea was too cool and way too popular to walk away from, but they had a responsibility to make it useful without being broken, and to have it be cool and fun but also make sense in the lore. All these contradictory things. We're not going to get into how scribing works, plenty of that in the coming weeks. The big takeaway is that this system looks like it was a nightmare to create, and way more complicated and impactful than any of the other systems we've had in recent years. Tales of Tribute, Companions, even Mythics and the Arcanist, they don't seem to carry the game-changing potential that scribing does. What we're getting in Gold Road is just the tip of the iceberg, and yet there are over 4,000 permutations that all had to be tested and refined just for this initial release. The devs also talked a lot about all the extra effort that went into making the story behind scribing. It is massive, and the testers who got to play it early say it's one of the best we've had in years, and about how it's not just another Psijic fetch quest. They want it to be an interesting chase and not a grind. Or another Tales of Tribute, which, let's face it, most players have never touched, but a real new layer in the combat system which makes sense and shouldn't destroy balance. We'll see about that, but talking to the devs away from the scripted presentations, it was easier to see how much work has gone into all this, and that this is something you just don't do without having major long-term plans for this project. Thirdly and finally, this celebration is gonna last a while, and I encourage you to jump in. I thought I was too old and too jaded to be so wowed by an event like this, but Amsterdam was an incredible experience. Meeting other players and content creators was a huge part of that, which ZOS cannot take credit for, but the organisation, the panels, the food, the entertainment, the nerdy little details were all world class. Not to mention the devs just mingling everywhere, being lovely, making friends with the players, and answering tough questions and having fun. It was a really positive feedback loop between the devs and the community. So if you're in a position to attend any of the many regional events coming up, or the big one in the US next year, I definitely recommend it. Obviously, I am a big fan of this game, but I'm not naive or especially easy to impress. It really was that good, and everyone I spoke to was inspired by the experience. I really hope I was able to transmit some of that in this video. Let's hope that Gold Road and scribing kick ass, as well as the PvP content coming later this year, that the new arrivals to the game will stick around, and that this awesome community will be going strong for many more years. Thanks to ZOS, thanks to the ESO community, and thanks for watching.